At midnight tonight, the Trump administration will impose sweeping new tariffs on the majority of U.S. trading partners. President Trump has already announced frameworks for trade deals with 6 countries and the European Union. Some of those agreements were finalized in just the last week. But even some of our largest trading partners don't have a deal done just yet. The president says he's giving Mexico an extra 90 days to negotiate. The administration is still discussing trade with China. Talks over the weekend in Stockholm ended with no firm agreement. The two sides are considering their own 90-day extension to finalize a deal.
Imagine a $120 billion trade route that completely sidesteps the United States, rerouting steel, batteries, and cars around America's borders without a single customs checkpoint. What if this new corridor could reshape the future of North American manufacturing and cost thousands of jobs overnight? Welcome to the Northern Corridor, a bold new alliance between Canada and Mexico that challenges Washington's control and threatens to rewrite the rules of trade.
Here is one way to see it. If we think of trade with the U.S. as traffic at a border crossing going south, data from the Bank of Canada suggests that the new higher tariffs would apply to just one narrow lane.
Starting August 1st, new tariffs of 30% will come into effect on imports from the European Union and Mexico. This move is part of a larger trade strategy that has already triggered some significant responses, particularly from Canada and Mexico. Rather than simply accepting the tariffs or trying to negotiate directly with the United States, these two neighboring countries have taken an unexpected route, quite literally. They are planning a trade bypass that avoids U.S. territory altogether.
Could undermine trade talks between the two countries. Now, Canada remains one of the U.S.'s largest trading partners, and the trade talks have been ongoing for months. But the Canadian Prime Minister warned that those trade talks could likely continue beyond the president's August 1st deadline. And today, the president signing an executive order implementing a higher 35% tariff on Canadian goods.
This new development is causing a stir because it challenges the traditional role the United States has played in North American trade. For decades, the U.S. has been the central hub, the main corridor for goods moving between Canada, Mexico, and other global markets. But now Canada and Mexico are building an alternative pathway that will reroute a substantial amount of freight around the United States, potentially reshaping supply chains across the continent.
50% tariffs on steel and aluminum, that is already in place. There's the 50% tariff on copper that also takes effect today, but that one is not across the board, and it lessens the impact for some Canadian producers. There is also the 25% hit on Canadian-made vehicles, but again, there's a patchwork of carve-outs for the auto sector for U.S.-sourced parts.
At the heart of this plan is what's being called the Northern Corridor. It's a large infrastructure project that involves a new rail and port network stretching from the Pacific coast of Canada all the way down to Mexico's Gulf Coast. The goal is to create a seamless route that bypasses U.S. customs checkpoints, allowing containers carrying steel, electric vehicle batteries, soy, and other key goods to avoid the tariffs set to take effect. The scale of the Northern Corridor is impressive. It's estimated to span more than 9,000 kilometers of rail track, covering major ports and logistics hubs. This is no small project. It's a multi-billion-dollar undertaking backed by both government funding and private investment. Canada's Mark Carney and Mexico's Claudia Sheinbaum have been leading the charge in unveiling this plan, and it has caught the attention of industry experts, economists, and political observers alike. The implications are considerable. For one, it threatens to reduce the roughly $4 billion per year that the U.S. government collects in customs fees and tariffs on goods moving between the three countries. That's a substantial sum, especially when combined with the expected revenue from the upcoming 30% tariffs. Losing that income would not only affect federal budgets, but also the industries and workers who depend on smooth and predictable trade flows. From an economic perspective, the corridor could make certain goods cheaper to export from Canada and Mexico, but more expensive for U.S. consumers and manufacturers. For example, steel coils destined for U.S. assembly lines might have to be sourced differently or priced higher if suppliers divert their shipments around the U.S. border. Similarly, Electric vehicle battery plants in Mexico could ship products directly to Canadian markets without passing through the U.S., affecting the pricing and availability of these components within the United States. The reaction in Washington has been cautious but concerned. Officials and customs analysts recognize that this bypass could weaken the effectiveness of the tariffs and reduce the U.S. government's ability to influence trade through border controls. The traditional tools of trade policy, tariffs, customs checks, paperwork audits, rely on goods physically crossing the border. When shipments skip that step, those tools lose their power. For workers and businesses in the U.S., this development adds a layer of uncertainty. Many industries, especially in the Midwest, depend heavily on cross-border supply chains that have developed over decades. Auto manufacturing, steel production, and parts suppliers all have complex relationships that depend on goods moving freely between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. If significant volumes of trade start to divert away, it could mean job losses, production delays, and higher costs. Yet Canada and Mexico's approach is pragmatic. Rather than focusing on political confrontation, they are investing in infrastructure and logistics that create real alternatives. This isn't just rhetoric or diplomatic posturing. It's a concrete shift in how goods will move across the continent. The Northern Corridor can be seen as a response to the increasing tariffs and trade tensions that have marked recent years. Rather than accept the new tariffs as a given, Canada and Mexico are building a system designed to reduce their impact and maintain trade flows with minimal disruption. This approach also reflects a broader trend in global trade, where countries and companies seek to reduce reliance on any single route or border crossing. The recent pandemic and geopolitical tensions have highlighted vulnerabilities in supply chains, encouraging diversification and investment in new infrastructure. In practical terms, the Northern Corridor aims to speed up the movement of goods while lowering costs. By avoiding congested U.S. ports and border crossings, exporters hope to cut delays and reduce fees. The plan includes upgrades to rail lines, new port facilities, and improved customs processing technologies to make the route as efficient as possible. For example, containers loaded in Vancouver on Canada's west coast could be shipped by rail south to ports in Mexico, bypassing the traditional route through U.S. cities like Seattle or Los Angeles. This kind of direct connection can save time and reduce the risk of delays caused by customs inspections or tariff disputes. On the political front, the corridor also sends a message about the shifting balance of power in North American trade. While the United States has long set the rules and controlled key parts of the supply chain, Canada and Mexico are asserting their own influence. They are showing that they can build infrastructure and trade networks independently, challenging the idea that all trade must flow through U.S. checkpoints and be subject to U.S. tariffs. This raises questions about the future of trade policy in the region. If the Northern Corridor is successful, it could encourage further cooperation between Canada and Mexico, and possibly even more regional integration that bypasses traditional U.S. routes. It also puts pressure on Washington to reconsider its tariff policies or find new ways to engage with its neighbors. The stakes are high. North America is one of the world's largest trading blocs, with goods worth over $1 trillion moving across borders every year. Changes to how trade flows can have ripple effects on industries, consumers, and governments on all sides. For viewers watching this unfold, it's important to understand that this is not just a story about tariffs or trade agreements. It's about how infrastructure and logistics shape economic relationships and political power. The rail lines and ports of the Northern Corridor are physical symbols of a new direction in North American trade, one that could redraw the map of supply chains and influence the balance between neighboring countries. As this new trade route comes online, businesses will be watching closely to see how it affects costs, delivery times, and access to markets. Policymakers will be assessing whether this bypass changes the dynamics of negotiation and enforcement around tariffs and customs rules. The Northern Corridor is a clear example of how economic actors respond to policy changes not just with words, but with tangible investments and new strategies. It highlights the complexity of modern trade, where infrastructure, technology, and politics intersect to create constantly evolving challenges and opportunities. So as we look ahead to August 1st and the start of the new tariffs, keep in mind the bigger picture. This is more than just a tax on imports. It's a catalyst for change that could reshape trade flows, industry competitiveness, and international relations in North America for years to come. The Northern Corridor is much more than just an idea. It's a massive infrastructure project with real physical components that are already taking shape. This new trade route stretches across thousands of kilometers, linking key ports and rail lines from Canada's west coast all the way down to Mexico's Gulf Coast. The scale and scope of this endeavor are impressive, backed by billions of dollars in both public and private investment. At the northern end of the corridor, the port of Prince Rupert in British Columbia serves as a critical gateway. Over the past several years, this port has undergone significant upgrades. These improvements include new docks, expanded rail facilities, and enhanced grain handling infrastructure. The goal is to create a highly efficient entry point for Asian imports and Canadian exports alike. Prince Rupert has become a vital hub because of its geographic advantages. It is located closer to Asia than other Canadian ports like Vancouver and offers faster shipping times. But what makes it even more valuable is the rail connection extending inland and southward. This connection is now being expanded and upgraded to handle double-stack container trains, which carry more cargo and move faster than traditional rail cars. This rail line stretches south, crossing through western Canada and eventually reaching the U.S. border near the town of Sumas, Washington. However, rather than entering the United States and continuing through American territory, the Northern Corridor aims to keep freight moving around the U.S. by linking directly into Mexico's infrastructure. In Mexico, the port of Mazatlan on the Pacific coast and the port of Veracruz on the Gulf Coast are undergoing massive upgrades. These ports are being deepened, expanded, and equipped with modern container handling facilities to accommodate a surge in freight traffic. These improvements are crucial for handling the increased volume expected as the corridor diverts cargo away from U.S. ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach. The corridor also includes significant road infrastructure, such as the toll-free Sonora-Durango Superhighway, designed to speed up trucking between the Mexican interior and its ports. This highway upgrade reduces travel times and transportation costs, making it more attractive for shippers to bypass U.S. land routes. The entire project is estimated to involve more than $10 billion in investment across both countries, including funds from private consortiums and government programs. Canada allocated about 2.3 billion Canadian dollars from its National Trade Corridors Fund to improve the Pacific Gateway, while Mexico committed approximately $1.6 billion to upgrade ports and highways. One of the main advantages of this corridor is that it creates a seamless transport network that avoids the need for U.S. customs clearance. That's significant because customs inspections, paperwork, and tariff enforcement traditionally take place at U.S. borders. By routing freight directly from Canadian ports to Mexican ports, the Northern Corridor eliminates those checkpoints and the associated costs and delays. From a trade policy perspective, this is a game changer. The United States has used tariffs and customs controls as tools to influence trade flows and protect domestic industries. But when freight never physically crosses U.S. soil, those controls lose their effectiveness. The U.S. government cannot impose tariffs on goods that bypass its borders, nor can it collect fees and taxes linked to customs processing. To put this in perspective, U.S. Customs and Border Protection collected more than $90 billion in duties, taxes, and fees in fiscal 2023. Much of this revenue depends on goods moving through U.S. ports and border crossings. If a significant portion of that cargo shifts to the Northern Corridor, Washington could see a noticeable drop in this revenue stream. Moreover, the corridor is supported by technological innovations that further reduce reliance on U.S. customs systems. Canada and Mexico have embraced electronic single-window systems, which allow customs data to be shared directly between the two countries without involving U.S. servers. These digital platforms streamline trade documentation and verification processes, cutting clearance times from several days to just a few hours in some cases. Blockchain technology plays a key role here as well. This technology creates a secure, tamper-proof record of trade documents and certificates of origin. Instead of submitting paperwork separately to multiple authorities, traders can upload data once, and it is validated and shared securely across the network. This innovation reduces errors, duplication, and fraud, making the process faster and cheaper. For U.S. customs officials, this presents a challenge. Traditional border enforcement depends on physically inspecting shipments and reviewing paper-based documents. With electronic single windows and blockchain-backed systems, much of the data exchange happens without touching U.S. systems, eroding the government's ability to monitor and tax cross-border trade. The speed and efficiency gains from the Northern Corridor are substantial. Rail carriers operating on this route report they can cut transit times by several hours compared to traditional crossings like Laredo, Texas, which is often congested. Faster delivery means goods can reach markets more quickly, reducing inventory costs and improving supply chain reliability. These infrastructure and technology upgrades make the corridor particularly attractive to industries like automotive manufacturing, steel production, and agriculture. For example, steel coils used in vehicle assembly plants in the U.S. Midwest could be shipped from Canadian mills directly to Mexican ports for export or redistribution, avoiding U.S. customs tariffs and fees. Likewise, electric vehicle battery components made in Mexico could be transported directly to Canadian factories or markets, skipping the U.S. entirely. However, these shifts carry risks for U.S. businesses and workers. The Midwest auto sector, for instance, relies heavily on cross-border supply chains that have developed over decades. If cargo volumes divert to the Northern Corridor, factories may face higher input costs or delays sourcing key materials, leading to production slowdowns or job cuts. Unions and industry groups have already voiced concerns about the potential impact. Many workers worry that tariff-induced trade shifts could threaten employment in steel mills, stamping plants, and assembly lines. The loss of freight passing through U.S. ports and border crossings also threatens jobs in logistics, customs brokerage, and related services. In addition, the reduced customs revenue poses a budgetary challenge. The U.S. federal government relies on these fees to fund various programs, including border security and infrastructure maintenance. A significant drop in customs income could force policymakers to reconsider spending priorities or raise funds elsewhere. This growing pressure has sparked debate in Washington about how to respond. Some lawmakers are calling for adjustments to tariff policies or new measures to strengthen U.S. trade competitiveness. Others warn that aggressive tariffs risk accelerating the very trade diversion they seek to prevent. The Northern Corridor serves as both a practical alternative for shippers and a strategic lever in trade negotiations. By building new infrastructure and embracing digital customs technologies, Canada and Mexico are demonstrating their ability to maintain strong trade ties without being dependent on U.S. trade policies. The corridor also highlights the evolving nature of supply chains in a globalized economy. Companies are increasingly looking for ways to diversify routes, reduce risk, and cut costs. Investments in rail, ports, and technology are key components of this strategy. Ultimately, the Northern Corridor is more than just a bypass. It is a symbol of changing economic dynamics in North America. The project shows how infrastructure investment, combined with innovation in customs and logistics, can reshape trade flows and shift bargaining power between neighboring countries. As the corridor continues to develop, its full impact will become clearer. Will it cause significant trade diversion from U.S. ports? Will it accelerate calls for tariff reform? And how will U.S. policymakers adapt to these new realities? What is certain is that the Northern Corridor has introduced a new dimension to North American trade. It's a route built on speed, efficiency, and technology, designed to weather the changing political and economic landscape. For businesses and workers on both sides of the border, it is a development worth watching closely. The impact of the Northern Corridor extends far beyond infrastructure and logistics. It reaches deeply into the fabric of North American manufacturing and employment, especially in the automotive sector. The ripple effects of shifting supply chains are beginning to be felt across factories, communities, and unions, painting a complex picture of economic risk and opportunity. General Motors' recent decision to temporarily halt production of its BrightDrop electric van line at the Ingersoll, Ontario plant is a striking example. The shutdown sent about 200 workers home and cast uncertainty over another 500 jobs. This pause is attributed in part to supply chain disruptions linked to the shifting trade routes and tariff policies influencing the movement of critical components like batteries and steel. The plant is scheduled for a battery upgrade in 2026, but the immediate impact on workers and the local economy is significant. Automotive manufacturing is an intricate web of suppliers, assembly plants, and logistics providers. Each job on the assembly line supports several others in the broader supply chain, including parts manufacturers, transport workers, and even local businesses such as diners and shops that rely on the income of these employees. Experts estimate that for every job lost at an assembly plant, approximately 7 additional jobs in related industries and communities are at risk. The BrightDrop example is not isolated. The Alliance for Automotive Innovation reports that roughly 10.1 million American jobs, about 5% of all private sector employment, are linked to the auto industry. This figure includes not only factory workers, but also thousands of suppliers, truck drivers, and retail employees. Any disruption to production or supply chains has the potential to trigger widespread job losses and economic downturns in regions heavily dependent on manufacturing. Unions are sounding alarms about the effects of the tariffs and the Northern Corridor's influence on trade patterns. The Longshore Union criticized the tariffs as an economic assault on working families after a significant drop in cargo volume through Los Angeles and Long Beach ports. These ports traditionally handle a huge portion of U.S. imports, and the diversion of freight to Canadian and Mexican ports threatens dock worker jobs and union bargaining power. Similarly, United Auto Workers locals have expressed concern that every canceled or delayed production runs chips away at the supplier base that underpins Detroit's automotive ecosystem. The shift of supply routes means less freight passing through U.S. customs checkpoints and fewer trucks on American highways, all of which impact employment and revenue streams. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers and staff are carefully monitoring these developments. The potential job losses and economic effects are translating into political pressure. Congressional aides are running calculations and considering policy options to respond to what many see as an urgent challenge to North America's economic integration. The stakes are particularly high in the U.S. Midwest, a region long known as the heartland of American manufacturing. Steel mills, stamping plants, and assembly lines depend heavily on raw materials and components moving smoothly across borders. If these supply chains fragment or divert, it threatens the entire manufacturing ecosystem and the communities it supports. One key question facing policymakers is whether Washington will reconsider its tariff strategy in light of these disruptions. The Northern Corridor essentially acts as a pressure valve, diverting trade away from the U.S. and undermining the leverage tariffs were intended to create. If tariffs remain high, more cargo will divert, increasing economic pain for U.S. industries and workers. There is speculation about a last-minute deal or a quota truce that could reduce tensions and stabilize supply chains. However, any such agreement will have to balance political considerations with economic realities, and the corridor's infrastructure investments already have momentum that is difficult to reverse. The corridor's backers make no secret of their intentions. By building modern, efficient infrastructure with tariff immunity, they are setting the terms of trade in a way that reduces U.S. control. Whoever builds the transport and customs systems effectively writes the rulebook for cross-border commerce. This shift in power dynamics is significant. The United States, historically dominant in North American trade, now faces neighbors who have found ways to sidestep its policies. For Mexico and Canada, the corridor offers a chance to protect their export industries, maintain access to global markets, and foster economic growth despite U.S. tariff pressures. Looking ahead, The corridor will continue to test Washington's resolve and adaptability. The first double-stack freight trains are scheduled to begin running before the new tariffs come into effect. This means the real-world impact on trade flows and revenue collection could start almost immediately. If the corridor succeeds in diverting even a modest share of freight, it will be a clear signal that traditional trade controls can be bypassed with the right infrastructure and technology. This could reshape how North American trade operates in the coming decades. The broader implications are also political. U.S. leaders must decide whether to adjust their approach to tariffs and border enforcement or risk accelerating economic fragmentation. This choice will influence negotiations, industry competitiveness, and employment across the continent. The Northern Corridor represents a fundamental shift in North American trade. It combines significant infrastructure investment, cutting-edge digital customs technologies, and strategic collaboration between Canada and Mexico. Together, these elements are creating a viable alternative to U.S.-centric trade routes. The consequences for U.S. industries and workers are profound, with potential job losses, budget impacts, and political challenges. Yet the corridor also demonstrates the power of innovation and cooperation to adapt to changing economic landscapes. As the first freight trains roll and tariffs come into force, the corridor's true test will begin. How Washington responds and how businesses and workers adjust will determine the future shape of trade and industry across North America. This story is far from over. The Northern Corridor has already changed the map and the playbook of continental trade. What happens next will affect millions of livelihoods and the balance of economic power for years to come.